What's up everybody, Camero here, and welcome to part 39 of my How to Make a Pokemon Game tutorial series. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at how to do level scaling for wild Pokemon and for trainers. First, we're going to look at the scripts to make it so that way wild Pokemon levels change, depending on the levels of your Pokemon. And then we're going to look at the scripts to make trainer Pokemon levels change, depending on the level of your Pokemon. So with that said, let's get into it. So, the very first thing we're going to do is go into our scripts and look at this script right here called Encounter Modifiers. What this script does is it modifies the wild Pokemon encounters depending on the map ID you are on. Specifically, this chunk of code right here, from line 20 to line 30. So this is for the random dungeons that Pokemon Essentials has. And I don't know if you've ever used them. They're okay, but what we do want to do is modify this code so that way instead of applying only in dungeons, they apply on our wild Pokemon on our maps. So there's multiple ways to do it. One way that you could do it is make it so that way it checks multiple maps, and if the map ID is equal to the map you're currently on, then the wild Pokemon will scale. But another thing that you can do is do it with a switch. And I have some code right here that I can just paste. So essentially, what this does instead of checking a map ID is if $game_switches, and then in brackets the number of that switch equals true, then it'll start scaling our Pokemon. And you can go in and you can look in and modify this code. Essentially, it's a little bit complex, but you can change these numbers to make it so that way it scales more or less, and there's more variety in how it scales. The Pokemon will generally be within 2 or 3 levels beneath you, but you could make it so that way they're a little bit higher than you if you just change these numbers and mess around with it. So, I encourage you to play around with it a little. So what we've done now is made a quick little change. So if the switch number 41 is true, then wild Pokemon will scale to our level. Let's instead make that so it's switch 100. If switch number 100 is equal to true, wild Pokemon will scale to our level. And it's that easy. So let's go in and test it. First, let's make it so when you talk to this guy, I was doing a little bit of testing beforehand. Let's make it so when you talk to this guy, he says, turning on scaling. And I won't make it so you can turn it off right now. This will just be like a real basic example. But switch 100, I made a switch number 100, and I called it trainer scaling. That's false. This will be called wild scaling. Apply. Cool. So if wild scaling is on, which we are now just turning it on, wild Pokemon will scale to our level. So let's get into our game and test this out a little bit. Alright, so let's get into the grass and try a wild encounter. I've set it so there's some Pidgeys and some Rattatas. Wow, that's loud. I've set it so there's some Pidgeys and Rattatas, and Bulbasaurs, I guess, in the grass. And they're all level 5. Nice. And our Gengar is level 55, so we can destroy this Bulbasaur. Let's run away, and let's turn on the wild Pokemon scaling this time. Now scaling is on. Let's try running into a wild Pokemon this time. Now, it should be a bit higher in its level. There's our Pidgey, and now it's level 54. Wow. So now the wild Pokemon grow to meet the level of our Pokemon. If I adjust Gengar's level as well as the rest of my Pokemon to like level 99, which I'll do right now, the wild Pokemon should follow. So that's pretty neat. It's something that you can do in your game if you, no, I don't want to do species. There we go, level. It's something you can do in your game if you want to make like a challenge cave that's always challenging. Or if you want to make it so that there's a place where all the Pokemon magically are a lot stronger. It's something that you can mess around with if you want to try it out. There's plenty of different unique and cool applications if you want to apply wild Pokemon scaling to your game. So let's try this one more time. And it should work just fine. Boom, there it is. Level 95 Pidgey. That's pretty good. Cool. So, that's working. Let's try doing trainer scaling now. So it's going to be very similar. We're going to have to go into our scripts and modify a script. And one thing that's very neat is there has already been an example made online by the user Thor348. Essentially, you want to go into your NPC trainer script and replace a little bit here with this red block, and a little bit underneath actually, down to here. And what this will do is something very similar to what our wild Pokemon script is doing. It's just making it so if a game switches on, in this case it's 41, but if this game switches on, then the levels of the trainer's Pokemon will scale up to your team also. So let's go into our game, and let's go into the NPC trainer script, which is right here, ptrainer_NPC trainers. And what you want to do is go down to this little chunk right here. It sets the species of the Pokemon, and it sets the level of the Pokemon. What we're interested in is where it sets the level of the Pokemon. So let's make a line break here, and paste in that block of code we copied. Very nice. And what we can do is delete this line down here. Boom. So, and since these are commented, these can really be deleted as well. Boop. Cool. So what this does is it says, if the game switch 41 is true, in this case we'll make it 99. So if the game switch 99 is true, it does a balanced level for the trainer that you're fighting in their party. And it sets them. It does randomization. And you can modify the numbers here, essentially. I won't go too into it. Just mess around with these numbers. They're tweakable. It won't break if you change a number like from 9 to 8, you know. So if the switch 99 is true, then the trainers will scale up to our level. So let's make it so that when you talk to this guy, he also turns switch 99 to be true. And we'll make switch number 99 called trainer scaling. Boom, there we go. So trainer scaling is now on. So if I talk to that guy, wild Pokemon scaling will be on, and trainer scaling will be on. Nice. Let's load into our game now. And let's battle this youngster. And I'm gonna crank up all my Pokemon levels again to like 90. And then his levels should rise to meet 90. So that's pretty cool. So if you want to make an area where the Pokemon trainers are all really tough, and they're going to always be tough, then you can do scaling in your game too. So there we go. He turned on scaling. Let's go to our Pokemon again, and let's crank him up a bit. Let's crank him up. Let's just crank him to 80 this time. And I don't really need to crank up all of them, because it should take averages, I believe. There we go. In fact, let's try this. Let's lower Alakazam's level and see what the average level is of the trainer that we fight. So we've got two 85s and a 15. Let's get into battle with this guy now. He says, I like shorts. Very nice. Cool. So trainer scaling is on. Let's see what Youngster Ben throws our way. A Rattata at level 87. Wowie zowie. So it seems like the formula takes less into account the lower level of your Pokemon, and is more determined by the higher level Pokemon you have. So it's not as easy to break by having one super high level Pokemon and a bunch of other lower level Pokemon. So that's pretty good if they're basing it primarily on the higher level Pokemon that you have. And here we go. So my highest was 85, and this guy's throwing out 87. So the current formula makes the Pokemon a little bit harder when you're fighting them for trainers. So if you want to modify it, like I said before, go into NPC trainers, find this little block, and mess around with it a little bit. Make it so the random is less or more. You know, just try playing around with the numbers. And also look at the encounter modifiers script again and see how they do their numbers as well. You can subtract or add, you can make it so there's random, so you can just mess around with it a little bit. So that's cool. So that's how scaling works in Pokemon games if you want to do trainer Pokemon or wild Pokemon. One other thing I do want to talk about really quick though is if you want to control the switches and make them on a per map basis, there is another thing that you can do. So there's another variation on this script that I will show you right now. I think it's important because, you know, it's good to have options. So in encounter modifiers, you can do if game switch 100 equals true, but there's another thing that you can do. You can go to the multiple form script and Control F and go down to where Shellos is deformed, which is 479. Did I say deformed? Defined. I'm sorry. Shellos is just fine. He's not deformed. So go to line 479 and 480 right here. And what this does is it creates an array of maps and then checks to see if the current map is in that array of maps. What that means is you plug in a whole bunch of map IDs here, and that checks to see if your current map is one of those map IDs. So what we can do is go back into our encounter modifiers and copy and paste that little chunk in. Boop. Cool. So let me explain what this does. This right here is a list of all the map ID numbers where it will scale our Pokemon. And what this does is a check to see if our current game map is one of the maps inside of this list. So, for example, we are on map 21. So we can add 21. It doesn't matter where you put it in, but I just like to put it in there so it's all like in order. You can add 21 to this list. So now the wild Pokemon will scale on map ID 21. And you can make it so that way some maps do have scaling and some maps don't. So now if I go and battle a wild Pokemon, it will still be scaled because we're using that new method. And you could also do that same exact method for trainer scaling if you want. Make it so that way some maps have trainer scaling and some maps don't. So you got options. There we go. See, it's working just fine. Our Rattata is scaling up to 58. Even though the switch isn't on, the map ID is the correct map ID, so it scales. Cool. So that's pretty neat. And one other thing I will talk about, one last little bit. If you are using the switch method and you want to turn it on and off based on the map that you're on, I would consider trying the map method right here that I mentioned. But there's another thing you can do. You can make it so maps where you want it on and maps where you want it off have a specific event on it. You can just go to like a corner or wherever. It doesn't really matter where you place it. I like to place them in the corners if they're auto-running events. Make a new event. Make it parallel process, so that means it runs as the game runs. And then what you can do is make it so that way it controls the switch. Wild scaling on or wild scaling off. Or control switch, trainer scaling on or trainer scaling off. And this technique can be used for other switches as well if you want. Basically, when you step onto this map, this event will start running, and it will turn wild scaling on or off, depending. So this is another technique you can use. It's kind of sloppy sometimes. I like to use it a lot for events and cutscenes, actually. It's a pretty neat little trick. I was going to say tactic, and then I said trick, and then I combined them into track. Anywho, so when you step on this map, this event will start running, and it'll turn wild scaling on or off, if you choose to do it this way. So this is another option that you can do. It's really neat for controlling switches depending on which map you're on. So, with that said, I hope this video helped you out. It was kind of all over the place, but I hope you could get some good info about how to scale your wild Pokemon and scale your trainers, and hopefully give you some good ideas on how to incorporate that into your Pokemon games in the future. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Once again, follow me on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Twitch and Twitter, and join the Thundaga Discord. And I hope that I see you guys next time, and I hope that you found this video helpful, and I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.